Paul, thank you so much for coming here today, for travelling over and chatting to us today. I'm so excited to have you on because I've been following you for years and I just love your approach to, self-awareness, personal responsibility, your ability to look at introspection and look at what's going on inside to help you, I suppose, live a happy life. This podcast has turned into, it was very much a fitness podcast, kind of turning into more kind of mental health, looking at yourself. What do you really want? And I love your content online because it's very much based around that. So thank you so much. A long-winded way of saying thanks so much for
Kellie.
coming on.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
I just want to chat about, to begin with, identity, because I work with my clients on identity a lot. And from your content, I can see that you're very much saying that early on in life, labels that are placed upon us, maybe from where we're from, our family, our community, they can impact the identity that we have.
I think maybe a helpful way to approach that idea at this stage in my life is to say that the voice that narrates the story of our lives is the ego. And the ego's job is to protect an identity that you didn't choose. So our identity was chosen for us by nature and nurture and environment and context and so on and so on. And all of that happens before with the age of 10. And when I've done research into this with psychological takes on all of that, they reckon that our fundamental belief systems that govern outcomes in our lives are established by the age of 8, latest 10. So in that first 10 years, which is blind for us as kids, we have no resistance to what's coming into us. We have no resistance to the identity being chosen for us. So it's set. And what most, and I mean most humans don't know is what I just said. They don't know that the identity that they have is an egoic one. And an egoic identity is a falsely constructed idea about who you're supposed to be based on who your parents and your culture and your religion or whatever, or your skin color or your gender or whatever decided you should be. And so what happens, I think, is people get into later life and are not happy with who they are, but are not aware that who they are is actually not who they are. So I do a lot of communication and mentoring and so on about this idea of being your authentic self, which I know is a term thrown around a lot now. But what I mean by that is there's another version of all of us that is not driven by the ego and its narrative, which is obsessed with labels. Because the labels keep the story about you intact. And when we're all born labeled, you're born male, female, black, white, rich, poor, Irish, American, Australia, or whatever, you're born with labels. So you're born into labels that you had no involvement in, of course, at all. You're just born into it. And then, of course, after you're born, the labeling system goes crazy then, handing you all these definitions of you that are handed down to us generationally, often by unconscious parents. So because the parents had no idea who they were either, they can do nothing other than pass on to the kids an unconscious idea of who they are. So parents trapped in a false egoic identity have kids, pass that on to the kids, and generationally it goes on. And I think I decided somewhere in my late teens, early 20s, I had what I would now call some kind of awakening to this language I have for it now. I didn't have that then. That I was becoming a default repeat of my father. And my father was a piece of work. He was a violent alcoholic and abused all of us and my mother violently all of our lives. There were 6 of us, I had 5 siblings. But in my late teens, early 20s, I knew I was becoming a repeat of him because I felt stuck. I felt powerless. I had no money. I had no prospects. I had 3 kids. by the time I was 20. And I just felt in many ways that what my dad must have felt in his young life, I was feeling too. When my dad felt that, and when millions of people do, you have some options. I think my dad chose poor options for what he did next, and I don't judge him. I think he did the best he could. But I think from what I know about my grandparents, and I didn't know them personally, they died before I knew them, but they were unconscious and passed that to my dad and so on and so on. But in my late teens, early 20s, I did things that took my life off autopilot, that would have defaulted, I think, to the repeat of history. And I think unless people do some version of that, and the sooner the better, you are stuck in this false identity that you still think is you. And so I think without some version of, and I know it's an overused word and it can be a bit woo-woo for people, but I think without some version of an awakening, an epiphany, a realization that you are not this person, but you are who you've been conditioned to be, I think that becomes your life, and people just live lives that they're not happy about and don't know why.
That's so powerful. It's so powerful because I heard about you speaking on this topic before, and that was actually a pivotal moment in my life when I started questioning my beliefs, and I started questioning, I suppose, all of the beliefs that were passed down to me from my parents. And it's funny that you say that word awakening, because I chat about that with my clients. I'm like, you have to get to a point of awareness before you can start then treating it or start changing. So like, I suppose what I'm trying to do is with this podcast, bring awareness to people to be like, okay, you're in this situation and it might be a shit situation, but you have the option of change. And also letting people know that it doesn't happen overnight. Like, anything, change your body, change your mind, anything that's worth having, it takes time, but it's about starting. And I think the starting point is always going to be that awareness. And then I suppose it's going to be difficult, fear of rejection, because when you start going against the grain, like if I was to bring this down to a really, really simple example, some of my clients that I work with, I'm working with them to try and help them with their body composition, and a lot of them can be stuck in families that are overweight themselves. And when they start working on themselves and they start to progress and they start to get better, there's a lot of friction from family because, you're outgrowing them. Right. And you're, I suppose, holding a mirror up to them and showing them that they're choosing to stay stuck. Right. So a lot of people, the first step is having this awareness, that awakening moment. And I really have had that myself, Paul. But then it's about, as you said, you always had a choice. Your father maybe chose poorer decisions than you chose, but it's not going to be easy. And I think one of the most valuable words that I've ever learned from you after consuming a lot of your content is the word unlearning. And it's only through unlearning can we then, I suppose, start to travel down the road of our authentic selves. And I am absolutely no expert on this, but I have started in the last couple of years to work towards trying to be my authentic self. But I know there's a battle that goes on in your head because, as Gabor Mate says, you have acceptance and you have authentic self, and you're constantly battling with the two because, you've grown up with these people, you don't know what else there is. So you're constantly saying, okay, well, if I choose to do different, will I be rejected, So can you chat to us about, I suppose, how and why we find it so hard to unlearn or to go against the grain that we've grown up with our whole lives?
I think if I could give a shout out, first of all, to awareness. I think it's underrated as a form of awakening, changing. There's this phrase, I think it's from the East. I grew up hearing it, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. The idea being that it's less to do with the availability of teachers and more to do with your readiness for the teacher to appear, whatever form that teacher may take. It may not be a person, could be a circumstance, a situation, like I had with my awakening in my late teens, early 20s. I felt that perfect storm of situations in my life that made me realize I am a repeat of my father, and I don't want to be, was, I suppose, the teacher appearing in the form of what took place. And I was so ready. And prior to that, for several years, I suppose, even though I'm in my teens, what got me ready to make those changes was awareness. And I want to give it a shout out because awareness is undervalued in favor of logic. Awareness is attached to your intuitive self. And logic, of course, is in the brain. And awareness always, to me, precedes learning. And a lot of what both of us do, Kellie, you and I think is a lot of what we do is we are raising awareness that often doesn't feel as valuable to people as, well, awareness about what do I do with that awareness? So they see no value in awareness because awareness is awareness. But because I don't consciously gain anything from that or what to do next, we don't value it. And so I've been beating this drum for years that if all you did today in what you do as a communicator or a voice, if all you did was raise awareness, then you did a good job today. Even though you may not be the person in that person's life that gets to see the result of that awareness, because that's downstream of your being there in their world, but upstream of them awakening, your voice, my voice, whoever's voice, contributed to awareness. And you and I both benefited from that in our lives with people that helped us with awareness. So I don't want to use that word in chatting and jump over it to, well, yeah, we all that word. Our people hear words like we're dissecting our little bit and don't know what they mean. And so awareness is a huge element to me. And hopefully from our conversation today, some people that are watching and listening will go away with awareness. They won't go away and change anything today or feel I can do anything practical. And that may be for all kinds of reasons beyond their control. But a lot of our conversation in what we do is awareness bringing because you and I see value in that when we know a lot of people don't. Awareness is the precursor to waking up. And then when it comes to the unlearning thing, I like that idea because like I talked about my background and my default to becoming my father and my being stuck in my egoic identity that I had no say in, I think unless we commit to some version of deconstructing that, of uncoupling consciously from what we were taught that made us become who we became, unless we start to question that, and most people don't, then what we do is, and this is a huge problem, I think, with the education system in our countries and in the Western world and so on, we think education and learning is always additional rather than it can be subtractive. And so we keep piling new things, new learning, new ideas, new podcasts, new gym memberships, new books that we read, new supplements that we take, new exercise regimes, new things at the gym. We add and add and add. And it doesn't last. Because you can't have a sustained behavior change without a belief change. So what sustains that new behavior you want is a fundamental belief change that you don't know you have that keeps defaulting you back to the lifestyle you don't want. And so all you're left with, when your beliefs don't align with behavior, all you're left with is effort and willpower, which is exhausting. So people try to effort themselves into a new outcome, and it lasts for a month or two, I don't know, maybe longer with a coach, I don't know, where you feel some accountability. But then eventually they default and they become these people that spend their life in and out of diets, in and out of gyms, in and out of all these spaces because they feel they want to be better, look better, feel better, but can't sustain it. No one says to them, you can't sustain it because you have a fundamental flawed belief system about food or about health or about relationships or about your emotional world or whatever. And much of that, of course, is inherited and part of this egoic identity. So I think the unlearning thing is really need to be talked about and powerful, because if I can say what I was taught was wrong and it didn't work for me and it doesn't work for me now, that's the beginning of separating from that narrative. Now, as you said a moment ago about not being popular when you make changes with people close to you, one of the challenges and difficulties with unlearning is if you're unlearning something that someone you love taught you and they're still in your life and they can see by what you're saying and how you're behaving, you're saying, I'm done with that. I don't believe that anymore, which means I won't be on that WhatsApp group. I don't want to meet you for coffee every Wednesday where we gossip about people. I'm changing my appearance. I'm changing my lifestyle. I don't have time for that anymore, or whatever we say or they perceive we say. And you love these people and you're indebted to them in so many ways, but this little bit or these 2 or 3 things, that's why I think people don't unlearn enough, or they unlearn a little bit, but then around the people they learned it from that they love, they default back to behaving that way. It's complicated, but I have become committed, and I encourage people to be committed and start small with unlearn what is not working for you, even though you love the people that taught you it. Don't keep piling new things on top of old things, because there's no foundation for the new thing to take when it's still rumbling around with the old stuff that you need to say, I'm done with that. It doesn't work for me. I don't believe that. And begin to step away from it. So I think it matters.
Yeah, and it's so powerful there when you were saying about the reason a lot of us don't unlearn or are not willing to unlearn, or maybe try and then stop, is because we don't want to offend those around us. And that comes from this whole people pleasing,
Yes.
the inability to say no. So when you said there, just start small, I love that, because it can be starting with literally just saying no to the smallest insignificant things and then building on that. But another thing you mentioned there, and the kind of way that I approach it with my clients is you cannot change your body, so from a physical aspect, until you change your mind. And you said it, people constantly, right, in these cycles, they do things that don't work. They're upset and then they go back to the same thing. So for example, like again, I'm trying to simplify this down for my listeners. People go into slimming clubs for so long. They get results, then they don't get results, but they go back to what they always know. So, in order, if people are listening to this and they're like, but how, Paul, how, Kellie, how do I change? I think it starts with that feeling of, feeling stuck, or also, are you doing things? Are you repeating cycles that are not working for you? And then it's about saying, okay, is this method serving me? And if it's not, it's okay to change. But a really important point you said there, you can't keep learning things and learning on top of learning. You have to, I suppose, unlearn certain concepts in order for you to learn the correct way down the line.
Create space, I think, for new things,
Create space, And also creating space, and that word space actually just rings a bell with me there, because when you were saying about people who taught you things and who you really value, they can be, family members, really close friends. But when you start going in a different direction, they feel like the space they're taking up in your life, or I suppose the relationship that they have with you, can change. And that's scary. So for a lot of people who are rejecting the new way you act, the new way you look, the new things you like, it's never about the actual person changing. And it's more about the other person projecting their insecurities onto that person,
Yeah, and I think if you make changes, for instance, in your appearance, I don't know how many years ago, maybe, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I grew my hair longer. I stopped coloring it. I surrendered to the gray and let it grow, and I grew a beard. And I thought, I'd never had a beard in my life. And I thought, I look pretty good. Others weren't telling me that, but I thought that. And then one day, randomly, I tied my hair up. And you wouldn't believe the comments I got during that day or two after I tied my hair up from my own family, friends. Oh, I have a midlife crisis, are we? Look like a drug dealer, Miami Vice, all these, classic, gifts. that they were verbalizing and memes that they were verbalizing. And so I thought it was interesting because the change of my physical appearance, they experienced as discomfort. And I became curious about their discomfort. And the discomfort, as you just said, Kellie, was to do with what other things may you change about yourself if you're willing to do that and not go back after we've criticized and pulled your leg and been rude. If that hasn't worked, what else might you be changing? And the discomfort often is two things, I think. One, it's that you are possibly becoming a version of you that they are not comfortable with. And two, what's also going on more subtly is they begin to feel conscious of their own lack of change. And your new hairstyle or your new dress or your new car or your new job or whatever it may be, just talk about physical things for starters, can be a threat to people who have been thinking for a long time about changing their life too, but haven't. Then you just rock up with a man bun or whatever it may be. And it all kind of triggering for them because they were thinking too about doing things. And I think I have felt, in my life that part of what I'm supposed to do, part of my why, my purpose, my calling, whatever you want to call it, is to be a crash test dummy for people. If I can survive the collision of making a change in my life that you wanted to make a change to, if I can do that and you watch me do it and I survive and come out of it well, it may inspire you to have a go too. So I do feel part of the reason I do what I do is to push through these pain barriers, to reinvent, to wrestle with complicated things like you do. And for people to watch and think, oh, let's see how that goes. So years on now, of course, this is my look and nobody has a problem now. And of course, people that never met me just see me as this. But what no one knows with any of this stuff is the pain someone goes through to get to the other side. And the truth is this, Kellie, and this is why it bothers me about it. Most people never make it. They don't sustain the change because one snide remark from someone whose opinion matters too much to you will shut you down.
Yeah, it just popped into my head there when you said that, the pain of change or the pain of staying the same.
Yeah.
It's like there's always going to be a suffering and it's which one you're willing to take. But
Exactly.
I think it's being brave and going against the grain. And from your content as well, I've learned so much from you. I said to Dan actually this morning, it's like, a football fan interviewing Messi. That's what I feel like now because I just value your content so much and I've learned so much from it. And a big thing for me that became very apparent after listening to you was that you're actually supposed to outgrow people. The people that were in your life 20 years ago are not necessarily supposed to be in your life now, because another thing I learned is that you're supposed to outgrow old versions of yourself. So I was constantly holding on to this version of myself that I thought was me until I had this, awakening awareness moment. And I realized that I am not the same person I was 5 years ago. I'm not the same person I was 1 year ago. And we're not supposed to be. But when people, as you said yourself, see you changing, it reminds them that they're not changing.
Right.
And it reminds them that they're choosing to stay stuck. And I think people who have known you the longest and who are closest to you are actually most resistant to you changing because you no longer then take up that space in their life, or you're no longer going to have that relationship, or you're no longer going to be this yes person. And a lot of my clients find this very, very hard because I recommend your, talks to them and say, listen to Paul and open yourself up to this concept. And a lot of my clients then start to question their relationships and maybe, break ties with that friend or break, ties with that relationship, which is very, very uncomfortable. But it's those closest to you that tend to have the most resistance to your change.
Yes.
And I think you had a quote there. You said every new version of you is going to involve leaving someone behind. which is very hard to take, you know. But if you want to actually get as close as possible to that authentic self, you have to outgrow people. And I think there's Chris Williamson talks about this lonely chapter, right? So you're saying, you said as well before, there's another group of people waiting for you to accept this new version of you, you know? But people can find themselves when they start on this journey of self-discovery, awareness, they can find themselves, outgrowing the old group of people they surrounded themselves with, maybe not yet finding their new group.
Yes.
So it can be a very lonely place to go through this,
I think that transitional space between versions of you or between relational connections in your life. Yeah, again, most people go back. And I became a student of my own transitions years ago because I felt that this space I was in wasn't an identifiable season. So it wasn't winter, spring, summer, or autumn, metaphorically in my life. It wasn't any of those things. It was something else, and I didn't have a name for it. And so I didn't know what to call it, how to dress for it, how to drive, as it were, like you learn in the snow, what climate I should choose, because it wasn't a recognizable season. So I thought, what is this then? And its characteristics were frustration, disruption, unhappiness, sleeplessness, irritation, boredom, excitement, pain, frustration, anger, resentment, all this stuff that I didn't know where to place or particularly why it was there. And so I again leaned into the awareness of that, to be curious about it, which again, the intuition loves that. The intuition is fueled by curiosity and love and adventure and discovery. The ego is not. That's why when you live intuitively, the ego will shut it down because the intuition takes you to roads less traveled. The ego likes to stay on roads well traveled. So I followed my intuition into what I was feeling and called it, for me, a season of transition. And then I began to give language to that and try to help people around the world with navigating theirs, either personally or corporately. Because we have no language, there's no weather forecasters out there that forecast for transition. They forecast for a known weather state. And so I became a student of that for me and for others. And I think, as you say, the bit in the middle, and one of the metaphors I used, that metaphor of the caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly, is great because I think it well describes what we're talking about here. But though I knew that metaphor in my own transition, I'm going from this to that. Either side of the cocoon, we know what this or that is. I was a caterpillar, I'm becoming a butterfly. So what we don't talk about is the bit in the middle, the cocoon. When I began to research the cocoon, it's fascinating what I found, because in the cocoon, the caterpillar literally liquefies its body. If you cut open a cocoon, what you won't see is a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. So a caterpillar maybe that's starting with wings, you don't see that. So in the cocoon, the caterpillar literally melts its body down, it liquefies. So in the cocoon, you could describe it as caterpillar soup. That's what it is. But in the soup of the liquefaction of the caterpillar is released what are literally called imaginal discs. That's what they're called. And they're like a disc. When you look at the fluid under the microscope, they're discs, like a discus you throw, called imaginal discs. And on those discs is the DNA of the butterfly. And the point I'm making here for us all is that the imaginal discs aren't awakened. Their possibilities aren't released until you are willing to have a meltdown. Until you're willing to surrender your former identity, which is the cocoon bit, which is the lonely bit, the difficult bit, the scary bit, then who you are becoming next doesn't wake up. So that's a bad deal, but it is the deal. I hate that deal, but it's how it is. You can't have a bit of both. And a lot of people try to settle for a bit of both. I don't want to go through the cocoon. And you get this kind of half-baked outcome where you're a bit of your old you around certain people. You go back to that old you. Then when you're away from them, you're this next you. But you keep both to try and keep everybody happy. And I think the cocoon is about letting go of who you were. And that's why I think we need coaches in transition, because most people go back. It's just too painful, too lonely, too dark.
Yeah, too uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that comfort zone, it's such a lovely place. We know, as you said, we know on either side of that cocoon, we know what there is, but it's going through that uncomfortable bit. And, it's rebuilding yourself, like you were saying,
Exactly.
When you look into the cocoon, it's literally breaking itself down to nothing to rebuild himself again, but it's so uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people choose unhappiness over uncertainty. So you say they keep going back. Going back, because we're all just terrified of the unknown, and how are we supposed to know? We're all moving parts. The only thing that we can control is ourselves. And you mentioned there a half-baked version. I heard that quote that you say, don't be a half-baked version of yourself, live to your full potential, try and go towards the, authentic self. But I think, if I'm being totally honest, I see this with clients is, they don't know. Like, how are you supposed to change something you don't know is there, So it's I think it's the feeling of being stuck, not happy in life, not belonging. Again, you can just stay, you can just sit where you are in this, unfulfilling place for the rest of your life. But that's just such a waste of a life, And I've heard you say before, you're allowed to change your mind.
Yes.
People are afraid. They think, how could I've always been this? Like for me, I used to be a secondary school teacher, right? So I grew up. I've done a lot of things that I suppose went against the grain. I studied neuroscience in college. I was supposed to be a doctor. Then I went out to Africa to build houses for orphan kids, and I was asked to do teaching one day down there. I loved it. Came home, told my parents, I'm going to teach. They were like, what is going on? So I became a secondary school teacher, and I was very much in the mind frame then of progress, become the principal, get a better wage, and all of these things. And I just sat down with myself one day, and I'm like, I'm chasing the things that society told me would make me happy, but it's not making me happy. Right. But I think we get so stuck in chasing this ladder of like what society tells us will make us happy. And we forget that we get to decide, You can change where you live. You can change the person you're with. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you get to decide your life. And then, full circle into what we were talking about, you get to decide who you surround yourself with.
Yes.
And I heard you mention it before, talking about, friendship or friendship audit. We need to be constantly looking at our surroundings and looking at the people we surround ourselves with and asking ourselves, are these people making us happy? Right. Because you get the choice to not surround yourself with those people. And I call it, asking yourself, like, because people say, how do I know? Kellie, how do I know? Ask yourself, are the people you surround yourself with energy sources or energy sinks? And if there's someone who's constantly, negative, and every time you have to meet them for coffee, let's say, you're dreading it, that's a telltale sign that you should be surrounding yourself with somebody else.
I think one of the best friendship audit questions on my sort of half a dozen audit question list is not how much do you like this person, but how much do you like yourself around this person? Do they bring out the best version of you? And that's a really good but painful question to ask, because if you know now for years, I am not me, and I'm certainly not a good me around this person, but you continue to have them in your life, then it creates another problem. It creates the problem of awareness and of knowing and experiencing the downside of that person, but because of either some people-pleasing tendency or who they are in your life, or fear, or familiarity, or comfort, or they're an otherwise nice person, great person, we leave it. And then we start going into, we try avoidance and don't pick up the call and don't return as if that's going to work. And it becomes sort of passive-aggressive to manage it, rather than having a conversation to say to someone, you're not good for my nervous system, actually, and here's why, kind of thing. who wants to say that to somebody that otherwise you love, or you may be indebted to, or you may be dependent on? When I do teaching with clients, with individuals and groups on people pleasing, one of the things I prefix it by saying is, I know what I'm about to say about people pleasing. I know this is not straightforward if you're in a codependent relationship, or if you are dependent on that person for paying the bills, or if you are in a violent relationship where if you say no or find your no voice and don't want to people please anymore, you could get beaten up. Or you're in some scenario where you're in danger to set a boundary and stop being a people pleaser. It's difficult. I know it's difficult. It's not straightforward for everyone. But it's still worthy of a conversation, because that means if that's true for you, then you can never be free of that. And that's not true. You know, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, one of the biggest takeaways of his book is this self-determination. Nobody can choose your internal climate. You get to do that. And people don't know that. Humans don't know that. And I say that aware that people in the world right now are in some horrendous situations. I often think, before I say what I just said, and I do this, you know, when I'm at home on my own and rehearse it in my head, how does what I just said sound to someone in Palestine or in Ukraine or in some trouble spot in the world or in some devastating situation like we're seeing in the news all the time? And it makes me sometimes say it differently or put a rider on it, like I just said about if you're in a certain relationship. But still, I want to say to people in those situations, I spend a lot of time, like it sounds like you have in Africa, where there's this helplessness generationally. But any given person, generation, they can decide in a small way, I'm going to do something different. I remember being in South Africa some years ago, and I was walking to and from my hotel to the car, and that morning I walked, and there was a girl lying on the floor in a sleeping bag, and she was obviously begging. And she gave me the biggest smile. It was unbelievable. I went back at the end of the day, she was still there, big smile, didn't ask me for anything, didn't put out a hand, just a smile. And I thought, wow, I wish I could help her to see that that matters, that smile could be the beginning of an escape from jail. It's a small thing. And so, you know, I've talked before, you may have heard me talk about the homeless guy that I was running to get a train, and I gave this homeless guy some money and ran past because I was late, and he shouted down the street, "Oh, by the way, my name's John." And I just stopped in my tracks. And I went back and sat down in the doorway with him and apologized. I said, "John, I'm sorry I didn't ask your name." I said, "I'll never, ever do that again with anybody I meet like you." And told him my name and chatted a little bit, gave him some more money. I learned from that. And I realized that asking someone's name that's in a situation where no one notices them, asking someone's name is a donation of dignity to them. I donated more to him by asking his name, he was trying to tell me, than giving him money. So the South African kid donated joy to me. She gave me something in that smile that she wasn't there to do. I should have been the one that was helping her. But I saw something of a reclamation of her life in that smile. I saw something of defiance in her smile, that despite a circumstance which nobody should be smiling in, she was. And when you and I talk today about starting small, I literally mean that. I literally mean today, in a given situation, can you crack a joke? Can you choose a different energy? Can you decide to respond in a different way, even if it feels like nothing to you? It is something, because those things daily, what I call habit stack. They daily stack. and change trajectory. You couldn't do it in one leap. But if it's a small thing you can do today that's reclaiming you and reclaiming your power and your dignity, start there. And the thing is, no one celebrates it. No one high-fives you because it's just something you do secretly, privately. And I've done millions of those things in my life when no one was looking. There's no encouragement coming. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. What do? You wait for the cavalry? They ain't coming. They're just not coming. You are the cavalry. And so I think when we start small, people think, what do you mean? Well, can you smile today in your adversity? I know you don't think it matters, especially if you can smile in the mirror and see yourself doing it and just see what happens.
Yeah, there's so much there, and it just connects, like that starting small. So many people won't do it because they don't see return on investment straight away. It's that, the ability to delay instant gratification for better things to come. And you were saying every single day you show up and you do that little thing, it compounds, and over time it pays off. And I always love the quote, like an overnight success takes thousands of nights, because people see me online, right? And I've millions of followers. I run this business or whatever. And they didn't see 4 years ago when I was crying because I just told the principal I wasn't coming back. And I was like, okay, how am I going to pay the rent this month, So I think people look at success and they idolize success and all of these things, but they never, ever think about what it took that person to get there. So it's always like, stop being jealous of someone because you don't know what it took for them to get there. And then that brings me back to when I'm trying to give out, I suppose bits of tips and tricks and education to people. It's like, you just have to start small. And as you said, no matter your circumstances, I know I'm talking from a place of privilege. I know there's so many people in the world that are so much worse off than me. But that, that's not going to change their circumstance by me changing the way I speak, So I think people need to realise and take it's difficult. It's very difficult. And again, it's easy for me to say, but I think people need to look at their life and realise that, okay, I might be in this shit scenario and I'm not responsible for my life or how I got here, but I'm responsible for what I do in this moment to get to the next place, And that, as you were saying, that woman, who was sleeping on the side of the road, like, you would never expected her to smile. But she has a choice in that moment, and it can be hard because a lot of people can choose to stay stuck. And I think I heard you speaking about this before, stuckness can be generational. And we do it because, I suppose, isn't it easier to justify yourself being here than actually to start making a change?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, one of the things I try to teach corporates, organizations that are looking for leadership is that leaders don't come assembled. They come in bits. You have to be able to, like a master chef, see apparently useless ingredients. There's no meal potential there, but a master chef will see instantly 4 or 5 complete dish potentials in the disconnected, disparate ingredients on the table. That's what people are like to me. So don't look for a completed version of a leader, a useful person. Look for component parts. So to me, the smile in that kid on the street was leadership. She was leading by choosing not to default to what would have been easier to choose, like you're saying, easier to stay like you are, easier to stay in that version. She chose to defy, she's even defying her chemical hormonal factory inside. She's choosing to defy, however she must have felt in her body physically, to smile. I know people with everything who don't smile. So I see in that defiance leadership. That's who I'm looking for a leader. To me, if I'm looking for leaders, and she was in my circle of life, supposing I lived there, and every day I passed her on the street, and every day she smiled, I would be interested as to her potential for leadership in something I'm doing, or a job somewhere that I could give her, or a role. she has no awareness that the smile is of value to anyone, but it represents some version of self-leadership, refusal to lie down and die, autonomy, because there's something about smiling and something about sense of humor that is very unique, because when you smile because you choose to, it is a huge act of independence and autonomy. Not smile because someone tells you to, or you're obliged to because they said something funny, but you don't find it funny, but you smile anyway. So her smile could have become laughter, could have become a defiant voice, could have become a productive life. And that's why I think you and I do what we do, Kellie, because unless someone tells these people that, unless someone sees value in what they throw away, unless someone says, hey, I can make a meal out of that, and they're about to chuck it in the bin and see no value, because no one's seen value in them. Because everybody's looking up here for what's useful. And I think what I've trained myself to do, because I was that person that was stuck, is to lower my gaze and to look lower, to look for John sat in the doorway, because these stuck humans often are the surprises of the future. If someone will believe in them, see them, notice them. I was that person. You were that person. And that's the majority of people in the world.
Yeah, the word potential just popped in my head when you were talking about that. You know, people who are stuck, everybody has potential. But I think it can be overlooked because of where they're from, you know, their parents, everything.
Yeah, right.
As I said, like, we're not responsible for the hand that we've been dealt, but we are responsible in trying to change that if that's what we want to do. And I think a lot of the time, the biggest block is the concept of not fitting in. Because as you said, like, if you were in, I don't know, an abusive family, or you're not happy, what are the options, you know? So it's that bit of not fitting in, and it's molding yourself into this version of you that's not really you, just to fit in. And I heard you talk about, you know, stop making yourself small to fit in. But on the flip side of that, you know, it's so difficult, because it's our default mode, isn't it? You know, we're conditioned to do, you know, sit down, be quiet, do what I tell you, because what's the alternative? Where do I go?
Yes.
You know? And I heard Brene Brown talk about this. She said the opposite of belonging is fitting in.
Yes. Because
the minute you change yourself to be accepted by other people, you're not fitting in.
Yes.
But it's so hard to change. It's so hard to move, you know?
Yes, I get that social pressure to fit in. And if you're from a generation of fitter inners, you're expected to be that too. And all kids are taught to fit in, aren't we? We're taught that from birth, to fit in. And, you know, psychologists talk about you have two selves. You have a social self and an essential self. And the social self is the version of you that was made to fit in. And there's degrees of that which are absolutely fine. You need to fit in to a degree that's healthy. But then the essential self is who you really are, whether you fit in or don't fit in. It's who you would have been whenever you were born in history, wherever you were born. This essential you, the authentic you, to come back to that term, is this other version of you. Most of us and most humans live all their lives predominantly as their social self, the fitting in self. And it makes for an externally more, I suppose, comfortable ride, but it is not a more comfortable ride internally in your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health, and how the body experiences that self-abandoning is not a good ride. And so what we do is we mask all of that internal chaos. So we're fitting in, but internally we're dying, and no one sees that, or very few see that, who become our support structure for what others don't see, who shouldn't be a support structure for it. They should be calling it out and questioning it as this is really what's been begging for change all your life. And as you say, and the longer you leave it, the harder it gets, the longer you take to wake up. Because when you wake up, you've got more to undo. If you wake up, you know, in your midlife or later than that, there's more stuff to undo. You know, if all your life you've been a certain way, and then, you know, in your 70s, you metaphorically get a man bun, then all hell's going to break loose. So it's that. So our appeal, you and me, our appeal to people is the sooner you start, the better. You know, I have 8 grandchildren. At least 2 of them are weird. I think their weirdness is their superpower, but the school's already trying to fix them. And what they're struggling with is they feel that they're naughty children, they're bad kids, and they're not, they're great kids. So one of them, she, at the parent-teacher's evening, her parents were told, my daughter, I have 4 daughters, my daughter was told, we're concerned about her because she doesn't participate in class, she don't put her hand up, doesn't ask questions, and we're bothered about she doesn't participate. To which I said to my daughter, I hope you don't tell her that, because that tells you more about the system that's broken than her. And this one-size-fits-all system that measures participation by a hand up, because I won't put my hand up. I never did at school with my introversion, which again, I didn't realize I was an introvert till quite recent in my life. So when I realized I was introverted, I thought, yes, because all my life I've been dragged to parties, made to be, you know, a social person, because extroverts think introverts need fixing. So they take us out to socialize us. And I'm like, hell no, because I hated it. But I went because I thought, well, maybe I'm antisocial. Maybe I am miserable. But I was just, my authentic me was happy to be away from those spaces. So I think with my grandchildren, these 2 that are quotes classed as odd, and they don't fit the system. So the system's punishing them. And I think we have to protect our children from that happening to them, to help shield them long enough until they find their own strength to continue in that authentic version of them. So I really feel for them. But that's happening, you know, globally in Western education system, as you know. So the fitting in starts in your childhood, but then education system does that on steroids.
Yeah, and no one can prepare you for this, becoming a parent.
Right.
I was always, you know, a pretty anxious person. I'm like that type A, constantly on the go. And then when we had kids, it was like on overdrive, you know. And we have this conversation all of the time, because our girls are starting in, you know, it's called ECI in Ireland. It's the childcare before they go to school. Okay. They're starting in 2 weeks, and I was just like to Mo, I was like, but they're not supposed to go in and sit down for 8 hours. Right. Can we not just bring them to the woods? And, you know, and it's just mad, because you're dead right. We are conditioned from 3 years of age. We're conditioned to do what we're told, to not have an opinion, to, you know, as you said, make people raise their hands. But what if that's not what they want to do? So, yeah, when you said that there, it was in my mind. It's like I am constantly trying to, or I'm going to try and to keep that spark in our girls, because we've twins, right? And they're absolutely mental. They're wired, you know, and people can look at them and think, oh, they're wild kids, but, you know, they're not. You know, I don't want them to be suppressed. I don't want them to be conditioned into this mindset that I found myself in. And again, I'm from a place of privilege, so I can't imagine, you know, how difficult it is for other people. But me going against the grain, Paul, when I told my family, my friends, that I was giving up teaching, right, a steady job, they thought I was insane. And they all, a lot of them put their own projections on me. Like, I had a lot of aunties and stuff say to me, well, you know, the fitness industry is like a saturated industry. And I'm like, keep that to yourself. Yes. Stop, you know, I don't want to hear that when I'm trying to start a fitness business. But it's just, it's from so early on, it's drilled into our heads to fit in. And one thing you said there, I've never heard it said this way, which I absolutely love, is like, I actually was going to ask you to try and help me explain to people what the authentic self is, because it's hard when you're not in that space to get your head around it. And you said it there, no matter what time you were born in, no matter what place you were born in, you know, the authentic self is, you're going to be that same person in all of those different spaces. You know, it's who you're supposed to be. And I love how you said there as well that you have to, you know, there is an element of needing to fit in. And that's what I said earlier on in the podcast. There's this battle between being your authentic self and, you know, being accepted. I don't think you can ever be 100%, you know, because there's always that battle going on. But for someone you know, thinking about, like, after listening to this podcast with us, and they're like, Jesus, that was amazing. You know, I have all of this stuff going on in my head, but I don't have the language for it. That's why I was so excited to get you on, because you gave me the language to express myself to other people, because I find it hard to talk to people about this because they're like, what is she talking about, this crazy woman, you know?
Yeah.
But you give that, you simplify it, you give that language to start talking about awareness, self-discovery, authentic self, you know? So for people out there listening to this and it's resonating and they're like, Jesus, I want to start this. I want to start becoming actually who I am and stop, you know, being the version that other people want me to be. You know, how would you start? Like, I started with podcasts, listening to your talks, all of these different things, but it can be quite daunting, you know?
Let me answer that by a phrase that I've used over the years for my own transitions and then passing it on to others, which is this: dress for where you're going, is what I would say to people. Don't dress for where you've been, dress for where you're going. And what I mean by that is I was staying in a hotel in the States, in San Diego, I think, some years ago. And I was in a coffee shop next to the hotel, and in came a Klingon, a full head-to-toe dressed Klingon from Star Trek. You know Star Trek?
Yeah.
The Klingons. Okay, it's another podcast. All the Trekkies out there. Yeah, we get the point here. Or take whatever alien species you want, but the Klingons were the famous arch enemies of the Star Trek crew. So this guy was dressed in a full Klingon alien outfit in the coffee shop. I mean, everybody, of course, is like, what? It was like early in the morning. What a weirdo, what a nut job. And he just like didn't bat an eyelid. What I didn't realize is that the event called Comic-Con was taking place in San Diego. There were thousands of Klingons in town, but he was on his own. He was a sole Klingon. And he was dressing for where he was going, but he's not there yet. So if you are not where you are going yet, if you're not with your tribe yet, if you haven't found your people yet, but you are already in the awareness of, that's who I want to be. That's the books I want to read. That's the podcasts I want to listen to and watch. That's the energies I want to be around. That's the kind of work I want to have. That's the kind of friendships I want. If you're in the awareness of that, that's what I call, you've begun. So lean into all those things. Dress for where you're going, even if, and this is why I like getting my books now on Kindle. But the reason I got all my books on Kindle at the beginning was I don't want that book lying around the house and people seeing it and saying to me, "You're reading what? What you reading a book on psychology for?" Or like you said, neurology, or whatever the weird and wonderful thing is I've loved to research because I'm very curious. And I just couldn't deal with the conversations about unconscious people explaining to them why I'm reading a book about something that it's hard to even pronounce the title of it, for me too. But there's something in the book that I think may be of interest to me, so I'm ready for that reason. And I think I'm saying to people, if you're dressing for where you're going, be careful. Don't announce it. Don't announce I'm a Klingon when no one knows what one is. There's never been one in your family, and there's no more of your kind around here. Give it time, but read the book. Get around the right people and do it secretly. Don't announce it. Do it secretly, quietly. And see what that does to you. When you read that stuff, what happens inside you? Do you awaken more? Do you feel seen? Do you feel understood? Do you feel happier? Do you want to know more about that little thing you read? And so you read a next book. That's what I mean about dressing for where you're going. Because eventually, if you keep dressing for where you're going, you're going to start meeting people that look like you. So when the random Klingon in Starbucks meets all his Klingon mates, no one bats an eyelid. We're just all Klingons. You are the odd one out around them that are dressed normal. That's what will happen for people that are listening to and watching us. If you keep going, you will find your fellow Klingon, your fellow weirdos. You'll find them. We are here. But we will not find you if you stay in the cocoon. Because we don't know where you are. We can't find you. We're trying to find you by this podcast. This voice that you have in your podcast, Kellie, and what I do and others like us, we're trying to put out a frequency. We're trying to find Pauls and Kellies 30 years ago. We're trying to find us. We're trying to find these kids that don't fit like my grandkids. So we're doing our bit. But if you don't make a move from your side, we won't meet in the middle. And I'm not sure that what I do will reach far enough to find you unless you also move towards me. So dress for where you're going, I said to people. Small things even. Do it today. Just a small change. An energy shift. I like that person on TV. I love it when I watch that comedian on TV. I love it when I am around that kind of music. Never had it in my playlist. But for some reason, that music lights me up. Put it in your playlist. Watch that person more on TV. You don't need to know why. It's an awareness you're experiencing. The why, understand, will come later. Leaning into it is what I call dress for where you're going. And then eventually, we're all going to look like you. And we're going to say, where you been all your life? We've been waiting for you. Welcome.
I love that. You get there, you're a Klingon, and then the old version of you no longer fits there. So,
exactly.
That's brilliant. It's so liberating when you get there as well. Like, I'm definitely not at, I'm not there yet in terms of completely trying to get to my authentic self. But I'm so much, I lived a persona of myself for so long. I was terrified of the fear of rejection. And it came from past traumas that happened in my life, But for so long, I was just the best at everything. So I was, the best on the rugby team. I was the captain of the rugby team. I was the teacher in the school who was getting the best grades. All of this. And what was I doing it for? For approval, for external validation, because I fucking hated myself, Right. But on this road, I've just felt it so liberating because I'm constantly like, oh, I like the person I am, yes. I'm getting there. But all along the way, because as you were saying, do it, like people who are listening to this podcast and want to start, I would totally agree with what you say. Like, do it yourself. People don't need to know that you're doing this. Exactly. Just start small and then it escalates and, you start putting yourself in these places. So you start meeting like-minded people. And also for me, it's like, because I've overcome that fear of rejection, it's like, there is going to be people who reject you. And I listened to this podcast with Mo Gaudat and this guy called Urian. And he said, not if, but when. Not if I'm going to be rejected, but when I'm going to be rejected for being who I truly am. But that's brilliant, isn't it? Because then it gets rid of the people that aren't for you.
About a year plus ago now, I got a random DM offering me an acting job. And I'm like, and Hannah responds to my DM, said, no, I think you got the wrong address kind of thing. Anyway, after multiple backs and forths saying, no, Paul doesn't act, he's not an actor. And you're just thinking of some random DM and some, what is it like a walk on, say 2 lines? Is it lines at all? I don't know. Turns out this guy's a proper bona fide producer, TV show producer in America. And long story short, he wants me to audition for the lead role in a TV drama in America. So I have a friend, somebody that I coach and mentor. He is a BAFTA award-winning actor in London, and I went to him for coaching, panicking the hell out of this, thinking, talk about uncomfortable. Because I always tell people, get uncomfortable, you don't grow in comfort, and now it's my turn. So I pursued it, and I did the auditions, and that went on for months. And long story short, after these auditions that I did in London and then on Zoom with actors in America and the director-producer, I got the part. Then they flew me to America. I filmed the pilot, and now they're submitting it to networks and so on to see if it gets picked up. I tell you that to tell you this whole process was 6 months. I didn't tell any of my family, not a soul. That's a huge thing not to tell anyone. But I didn't because I didn't want their contamination. Also, I knew that I had a million questions I didn't have the answers to. I had no idea what the answers were to questions they had asked me because I didn't ask them yet. And I remember the Christmas in between, because it spanned over Christmas, this 6 months. There was a game the grandkids were playing, and you spin a wheel and ask the question of different family relatives, and the kids call me Papa, grandkids, and it was, will Papa ever be an actor? And I'm sitting on this by this time for 3 months. That was the time to have the big Christmas reveal, right?
Yeah.
I was so close. Will Papa be an actor? And the wheel dropped on, maybe. I thought, this thing was spookily accurate. So I said, so they all laughed, and I just thought, just hold it for another few seconds, and you'll be through the pressure to tell them. Just hold. So I did. I just laughed and thought, oh my God, this would be a perfect time. Well, actually, there's something I want to tell you. So I didn't. I held it. So when I say to people, keep it secret, keep it private, I mean it. Because a lot of people don't make it to the new version of them or the new interests that they want to have because they talk about it too soon and it's shut down. What? You're doing what? You know where, and all this stuff that comes, and it just, like the man bun thing, it shuts you down. So I wanted to teach myself that I could not tell people I love close to me, and I was okay with that. I had to, in my mind, deal with this voice that said, but you're deceiving them, you're lying to them, you're not being authentic with them. What about when you do tell them and they find out? All of that. I had to deal with all of that because my authentic self was telling me, you need to hold this to keep it intact. If you share it too soon, you're going to say no to these people. At the beginning, it's so fragile. All things are so fragile at the beginning, new things, and you won't do it. It was the adventure of my life for years. This thing I did for acting was scary as hell. I mean, it wasn't just acting. I mean, I am the lead actor, and all these people are professional actors. So on day one in the makeup trailer, they're all there, these actors. They've been on, Vampire Diaries, all kinds of shows, the American actors, talking about their acting and the shows they've been on and the years they've been doing it. And I'm thinking, any minute now, they're going to say something to me like, Paul, how long you been acting? And I'm like, so surely enough, Paul, great to see you, great to meet you. How long you been acting? I said, well, about 5 minutes, actually, in the auditions. And that's not proper acting, is it? I thought, I need to just come clean straight up front. And they were so kind, all of them, actually, and were very complimentary in genuine ways that helped me to go through that 2 weeks. But I think it would have been strangled at birth. It would have died at the beginning. It would have never got feet if I'd have talked about it too soon. And I want to say to people listening to us, watching us, who are contemplating a life change, please be careful who you talk to about it and when. Give yourself time to feel strong about it. Give yourself time to form your own convictions about it so that when you do tell people and you do get resistance, you've anticipated it and you've built antibodies against it and you'll be fine.
Yeah, because a lot of the time you don't know the answers yourself, So as you said, when you start a new thing or something that's outside of the norm for your group or your echo chamber, this constant feedback that everyone's giving, telling each other how great they are and all of these things. When you start to go against that and people are saying, why are you doing that?
Right.
Like you're like, I don't know, I just want to, So you don't even have the answers. That's how you learn anything is you start and then the answers appear. But, a lot of the time, if you put it out too early and you do get that negative feedback and that can be the deciding factor on whether you continue down that road or not.
Yes. I think so many dreams die there because they were contaminated, interfered with, hijacked, drowned, destroyed because people talked about it too soon. And I hate that. I meet so many people around the world of whom that's true, who didn't have the strength to go back and redo it. So they just didn't bother. So you never know what they could have become. And one of people's main regrets in life is some version of that they had a dream at some point in their life and didn't follow through because. So they never know that would have become. But the pain of that also is that if that was a wake-up call, if that dream, that opportunity, that DM, that whatever it was, if it was a wake-up call for you to pursue, to become your authentic self, and you didn't respond because of other people's negativity, the circumstance passes, the moment passes, but the energy doesn't. It remains in you as a regret, as a what if I had. You remember how good you felt until you didn't feel good anymore after people shut it down. And often people carry that into late life. I just wish I had. And I've done a lot of research and teaching on regrets. And the most common regrets are regrets of what people didn't do, not what they did do. And I think that's what happens when we don't pursue something because it's not popular. Is that going to become a regret later in life? Because you knew actually possibly this was the threshold of something big. You didn't look at it at the time, but inside somehow I knew that it was the beginning of my coming out the closet as a Klingon.
Coming out the closet as a Klingon.
It was my beginning of that adventure, and I let it go because there was no Klingons in sight.
Well, I'm going to wrap up the podcast soon because I'm conscious of your time, but that just leads me into something perfect. I was reading a book and it was the top 5 regrets of the dying.
There you go.
And
yes.
it was an Australian woman who worked with terminally ill people at the end of their life, and she asked them, hundreds, thousands of people, what are your top 5 regrets? One of the top 5 was people saying, I wished I lived a life true to myself.
There you go.
And not a life that other people wanted for me.
Wow, there you go.
So, Paul, thank you so much. Honestly, I was so excited and it did not disappoint. And I just think if people are in that space where they're ready to change, this episode can be invaluable. So thank you so much for your time.
I have no regrets about being here with you.
Brilliant.
I hope our viewers don't either.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you.